Princess Talia of the Istrian Empire stood in the dimly lit repair shop, her iridescent skin glowing with barely contained fury. The royal transport pod lay in pieces around her, its crystalline engine core dark and lifeless. She had never set foot in such a place before, the grime and mechanical chaos offended her every sense. But she had no choice. The pod's failure had forced her emergency landing in the human sector of New Atlas, far from the gleaming spires of the Istrian quarter. "Your Highness," the human mechanic drawled, not bothering to bow, "crystalline drives don't just fail randomly." He ran a diagnostic tool over the engine's remains, his dark eyes narrowed in concentration. Someone sabotaged this. Talia drew herself up to her full height, her translucent robes shimmering in the workshop's harsh lighting. Preposterous. No one would dare. Someone did. Riker Nash wiped his hands on his coveralls and held up a twisted component. This regulator was deliberately corrupted. "Old Imperial tech is my specialty, Your Highness, and this wasn't an accident." "You will address me as Your Radiance," Talia corrected automatically, though her heart raced at his words. The pod's failure had seemed suspicious, occurring just as she'd left the safety of the palace shields. "How long until you can repair it?" Riker's laugh was harsh. "Repair it? The core's completely fried. You need a new one, and those don't exactly grow on trees in the human sector." He studied her with unsettling directness. "Why were you flying alone, anyway? Don't you royals usually travel with an entire parade?" Talia's fingers twisted in her robes, a nervous tell she'd never quite mastered controlling. "My movements are none of your concern, human. I require transportation back to the Istrian quarter immediately." "Yeah? And I require a vacation on Titan's pleasure moons. We don't always get what we want." He turned back to the pod, but froze suddenly. "Get down." Before Talia could process his words, Riker tackled her to the ground. Something whizzed overhead, embedding itself in the wall with a metallic thunk. Her first instinct was outrage at being manhandled by a human, but then she saw the dart vibrating in the wall, its tip glistening with something that definitely wasn't mechanical lubricant. "How dare they," she began, but Riker's hand covered her mouth. "Quiet," he hissed. "Unless you want the next one between your eyes." He pulled her behind a massive piece of machinery, his body tense as he scanned the shadows. "Your pod wasn't the only thing that was sabotaged. Someone led you here." Talia wanted to deny it, but the evidence was becoming difficult to ignore. She'd insisted on making this trip alone, against her security chief's advice. The pod's failure, the remote repair shop, the assassination attempt, it was all too perfectly orchestrated. "There." Riker pointed to a flicker of movement in the rafters. He reached slowly for a tool on his belt. No, Talia realized, not a tool. The weapon hummed to life, its energy signature distinctly non-regulation. "You're armed," she whispered incredulously. "In this neighborhood?" "Always." He fired in one smooth motion. There was a cry from above, and a dark figure crashed to the floor. But before they could investigate, more shadows detached themselves from the walls. "Your Radiance," Riker said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he pulled her toward a hidden door, "I suggest we continue this discussion elsewhere. I am not running away like some common." Her protest ended in an undignified yelp as energy bolts sizzled past them. "You can die with dignity if you prefer," Riker growled, "but I'm rather attached to living." He yanked the door open, revealing a narrow passage beyond. More shots forced the decision for her. Talia dove through the doorway, her perfect poise forgotten in the rush to survive. Riker followed, sealing the door with a security code. In the tight confines of the passage, Talia was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth radiating from his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. No one had ever been this close to her without proper ceremonial permission. "The passage leads to the lower levels," he explained as they moved swiftly through the darkness. My backup workshop. We should be safe there while we figure out who's trying to kill you. I demand you return me to the palace immediately. Your Radiance, he said, and this time there was no mockery in his voice, only deadly seriousness. Someone with serious resources wants you dead. They corrupted your pod, led you to my shop, and had assassins waiting. The palace might be the last place you want to go right now. Talia felt her world tilting on its axis. She'd been raised in ultimate privilege, surrounded by servants who anticipated her every need. The idea that she might not be able to return home, that she might have to rely on this rough human mechanic for survival, was almost too much to process. Why are you helping me? She asked suddenly. What do you want? Riker paused at an intersection, checking both directions before continuing. Let's just say I've seen enough of what happens when your people and mine don't work together. Besides, he added with a grim smile, I hate it when someone uses my shop for an ambush. Bad for business. They emerged into a larger space, filled with more machinery but clearly better organized than the shop above. Riker secured the entrance while Talia tried to process her new reality. Her robes were smudged with dirt, her hair in disarray, and she was alone with a human who showed no respect for her station. Yet he'd saved her life, possibly multiple times in the span of a few minutes. We need to get you out of those clothes, Riker said, opening a storage unit. You're like a glowing target in that outfit. I will not wear human garments, Talia declared, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Your Radiance, Riker said patiently, you have two choices. Change, or die. Those assassins won't stop coming, and right now you couldn't blend in at a royal light festival. He tossed her a bundle of cloth. Time to decide what's more important, your pride or your life. Talia stared at the rough fabric in her hands. She'd never dressed herself, never worn anything but the finest Astrian silk. But she was also her father's daughter, and somewhere beneath the layers of privilege and protocol was a survivor's instinct. She began, then straightened her spine. I will require assistance. I've never, that is, I don't exactly. You don't know how to put on clothes, Riker finished, and to his credit, he didn't laugh. Well, Your Radiance, consider this your first lesson in living like a common person. Don't worry, I'm a mechanic. I'm good at figuring out how things work. Talia looked at him sharply, but saw only professional detachment in his expression. Still, as she fumbled with the unfamiliar garments, she couldn't help feeling that her life had just changed irrevocably. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. 2 days in the human sectors had taught Princess Talia more than a lifetime in the palace. She'd learned that her iridescent skin could be dulled with a special compound, that human food was surprisingly edible, and that sleeping on something other than cloud silk wasn't actually fatal. But most importantly, she'd learned that everything she thought she knew about survival was wrong. You're holding it wrong, Riker said, adjusting her grip on the plasma torch. They stood in his backup workshop's training area, where he'd insisted on teaching her basic self-defense and survival skills. Thumb here, fingers wrapped like this. You're not holding a ceremonial scepter. This is beneath my station, Talia muttered, but she adjusted her grip anyway. The torch felt alien in her hand, its weight unfamiliar. She'd never had to hold anything heavier than a dining utensil before. Your station nearly got you killed. Riker moved behind her, his hands guiding her arms into the proper stance. Now, the torch isn't just a tool. In an emergency, it's a weapon. Aim for the power core, Talia finished. Yes, I was paying attention. She tried to ignore how close he stood, how his presence made her skin tingle in a most unroyal way. Good. He stepped back, appraising her form. You're learning faster than I expected. Just because I've never had to do these things doesn't mean I'm incapable of learning them. She demonstrated the defensive stance he'd taught her earlier, pleased when he nodded in approval. Fair enough. Riker moved to a workbench, where he'd been analyzing data from her sabotaged pod. Speaking of learning, I think I've found something. The corruption signature in your pod's core, I've seen it before. Talia set down the torch and joined him at the bench, conscious of how naturally the movement came now. Just days ago, she would have demanded he bring the information to her. Where? Military tech, about 3 years ago. Someone was sabotaging Alliance shipments to the Outer Rim. He pulled up a holographic display, pointing to matching patterns. This is highly specialized work. Whoever's trying to kill you has connections to both human and Astrian technology. The Unity faction, Talia breathed. The rebel group had been gaining power, pushing for forced integration between humans and Astrians, by any means necessary. But why target me? I'm hardly involved in politics. You're the Emperor's daughter, Riker said simply. Your death would spark exactly the kind of chaos they want. He paused, studying her face. There's something else you're not telling me. Talia turned away, but he caught her arm. The casual contact still startled her, though she was growing accustomed to his disregard for royal protocol. If I'm going to keep you alive, I need to know everything, he insisted. The Unity faction. She took a deep breath. They approached me 6 months ago. They wanted me to be their spokesperson, to advocate for their cause. They said a royal voice would give them legitimacy. And you refused. Of course I refused. They're terrorists hiding behind pretty words about unity. She pulled away from him, pacing the workshop. But I didn't report them. I thought if I just ignored them, they'd leave me alone. That's not how terrorists work, Your Radiance. His voice held no judgment, just stated fact. They don't take rejection well. A crash from above cut off her response. Riker moved instantly, pulling her behind a reinforced workbench as footsteps thundered down the passage to their sanctuary. Time to put those lessons to use, he said grimly, drawing his weapon. Remember what I taught you? Talia grabbed the plasma torch, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Aim for the power core? That's my princess. His grin was fierce in the workshop's dim light. 3 entry points. They'll try to box us in. Then we should disappoint them. Talia surprised herself with her calm. The maintenance shaft behind the power converter. It leads to the old subway tunnels. Riker's eyebrows rose. You've been studying the escape routes. I do pay attention. She managed a small smile. Though I still maintain this jumpsuit is horrifically unfashionable. The first explosion rocked the workshop doors. Riker laid down covering fire while Talia moved toward the hidden exit, her movements fluid with practiced precision. The past 2 days of constant drills were paying off. They made it to the tunnel entrance just as the doors breached. Talia caught a glimpse of their attackers, a mix of humans and Astrians, all wearing the Unity faction's distinctive silver armbands. Your Radiance, one of them called out. We only want to talk. Funny way of showing it, Riker muttered, sealing the tunnel entrance behind them. You okay? Ask me when we're not running for our lives. But Talia felt strangely energized. For the first time in her life, she was doing something real, something that mattered. They moved swiftly through the tunnels, Riker leading but Talia close behind. She'd memorized the layout during their planning sessions, another skill she'd never thought she'd need. We need to get word to my father, she said as they emerged into an abandoned station. If the Unity faction is this bold, they must be planning something bigger. Already ahead of you. Riker pulled out a secure communicator. But we need proof. No one's going to take the word of a human mechanic and a runaway princess. I am not a runaway, Talia protested automatically. Then she caught his meaning. The pod's data core. You made a copy? First rule of mechanics, always back up your data. He showed her the encrypted drive. But we need somewhere safe to analyze it. Somewhere they won't expect. Talia thought for a moment, then smiled. Actually, I might know a place. But you're not going to like it. Why not? Because, she said, enjoying the irony, it's in the royal palace. In my private quarters. Riker stared at her. You want to go back to the most obvious place they'll look for you? Exactly why they won't expect it. Besides, she added, her smile turning mischievous, I have some more suitable clothes there. This jumpsuit really is dreadful. Your radiance, Riker said with exaggerated patience, has anyone ever told you you're impossible? Never to my face. She started walking, remembering to check sight lines as he'd taught her. They wouldn't dare. As they made their way through the underground maze, Talia realized she felt more alive than she ever had in the palace. The danger was real, but so was the sense of purpose. For the first time, she wasn't just the pampered princess, she was someone who could make a difference. And if her heart beat a little faster when Riker smiled at her, well, that was just the adrenaline. Wasn't it? Infiltrating the palace turned out to be surprisingly easy. The hard part was watching Talia's face as they discovered her father's private chambers empty, the sheets cold. Emperor Valerian had vanished, leaving behind only a cryptic message on a quantum-locked data crystal that needed both royal DNA and mechanical expertise to unlock. This proves he knew something was coming, Talia said, pacing her quarters while Riker worked on decoding the crystal. She'd changed into more suitable attire, a practical but elegant suit that combined Astrian style with human functionality. My father would never leave without warning unless he was protecting something bigger than himself, Riker finished, his fingers dancing over the crystal's complex interface. He glanced up at her. Or someone. Their eyes met, and Talia felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. Over the past days, she'd come to rely on him in ways that went far beyond mere survival. His presence grounded her, gave her strength she never knew she possessed. Got it, he announced. The crystal hummed to life, projecting a holographic message. Emperor Valorian's image appeared, his usually perfect composure showing signs of strain. Talia, if you're seeing this, then my worst fears have been confirmed. The Unity faction is merely a front for something far more insidious. Her father's image flickered. Project Synthesis, it was never about harmony between our peoples. They're trying to access the ancestral core. Talia gasped. The ancestral core was the source of the Astrian people's unique abilities, the crystalline heart of their civilization. Its location was the most closely guarded secret in the Empire. The coordinates are encoded in your genetic signature, daughter. I couldn't risk them falling into the wrong hands. The Emperor's expression softened. Trust your instincts, Talia. You're stronger than you know. The message ended, leaving them in stunned silence. What's the ancestral core? Riker asked quietly. Talia touched the crystal, her skin glowing faintly. It's everything. The source of our power, our connection to the stars themselves. In the wrong hands, it could be used to rewrite Astrian DNA completely. Turn your people into weapons, Riker realized. Perfect soldiers for their forced unity campaign. We have to stop them. Talia squared her shoulders, looking more regal than she ever had in her finest royal garments. But I can't do it alone. You're not alone. Riker stood, closing the distance between them. But accessing these coordinates won't be easy. The Unity faction has probably infiltrated every level of. A soft chime interrupted him. Talia's private communication system was activating, showing an incoming message from an unexpected source. Lady Seleni's? Talia frowned. My father's chief advisor. She's supposed to be off-world on a diplomatic mission. The elegant Astrian woman appeared on the screen, her relief apparent. Princess Talia. Thank the stars you're alive. We've been searching everywhere. Her gaze shifted to Riker, disapproval evident. I see the rumors about your companion are true. Lady Selene's, what's happening? Where's my father? Safe, Your Radiance. We've established a secure facility. I'm sending coordinates now. Come quickly, there's so much you need to know. The transmission ended. Riker was already shaking his head. It's too convenient, he said. Why contact you now? How did she know you were here? She's served my family for decades, Talia protested, but uncertainty crept into her voice. She practically raised me after my mother died. Which makes her the perfect infiltrator. Riker checked his weapons. Think about it. The Unity faction knew exactly when to hit your pod, exactly where you'd be. Someone with inside knowledge had to be helping them. Talia wanted to deny it, but her training with Riker had taught her to look past surface appearances. She reviewed her memories of recent months, Lady Selene's subtle questions about the ancestral core, her increased interest in human-Astrian relations. If you're right, she said slowly, then we're walking into a trap. Probably. Riker grinned. Want to spring it anyway? You're enjoying this far too much. Life's more interesting since you crashed into my shop, Your Radiance. His hand brushed hers, sending sparks of electricity through her body. Besides, springing traps is kind of our thing now. They spent the next hour preparing, gathering weapons and supplies. Talia found herself moving in perfect sync with Riker, anticipating his needs as he anticipated hers. They'd become a team, transcending the barriers of their different worlds. The coordinates lead to the old crystal mines, Talia noted, studying the map. It's isolated, defensible. Perfect for an ambush. Riker handed her a plasma pistol, their fingers lingering on the exchange. Ready to disappoint some traitors? Actually. Talia took a deep breath. There's something I need to do first. In case this goes wrong. Before she could lose her nerve, she pulled him close and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was electric, awakening sensations she'd never dreamed possible. For a moment, the universe narrowed to just this, the warmth of his embrace, the racing of their hearts. When they finally parted, Riker looked stunned. Your Radiance. I think, given the circumstances, you can call me Talia. She straightened her jacket, trying to regain her composure. Now, shall we go spring this trap? His slow smile was answer enough. Together, they made their way through the palace's secret passages, emerging into the gathering dusk. The crystal mines waited in the distance, their ancient spires glowing with latent power. Whatever happens, Talia said softly, I want you to know that meeting you, it changed everything. You showed me who I could really be. You always had it in you, princess. Riker checked their surroundings one last time. I just helped you find it. They moved forward into the deepening shadows, ready to face whatever waited ahead. Talia felt no fear, only determination and a fierce joy in having found something worth fighting for. She might have been born a pampered princess, but she would face this crisis as a warrior. And she wouldn't face it alone. The ancient crystal mines stretched before them like a labyrinth of light, each tunnel pulsing with the remnants of Astrian power. Talia felt the energy calling to her blood, stronger than she'd ever experienced. They were close to something important, she could sense it. Security systems are still active, Riker muttered, checking his scanner. But they're running on old protocols. Someone's been here recently. Lady Selene's. Talia's heart ached at the betrayal, but she forced herself to focus. She would have access to the royal override codes. The same ones that would have let her sabotage my pod. They moved deeper into the mines, following the increasing energy signature. Riker had insisted on teaching her how to read the scanner, another skill she'd never imagined needing as a princess. Now it felt as natural as breathing. Hold. Riker's hand shot out, stopping her. Look at the crystal formation on the left wall. Talia studied it, then saw what he meant. The natural growth patterns were disrupted, showing signs of recent manipulation. They're trying to trace the energy flows, following them to the ancestral core. He met her eyes. Your father said the coordinates were in your genetic signature. Can you feel it? She closed her eyes, letting her awareness expand. The crystal energy flowed around her like streams of light, forming patterns that resonated with something deep in her DNA. This way. They followed her intuition through a maze of tunnels, avoiding the obvious paths that likely held traps. Talia found herself grateful for the practical outfit she wore. Her royal robes would have been impossible to manage in these tight spaces. You know this is definitely a trap, right? Riker said as they approached a vast chamber ahead. Of course it is. Talia checked her weapons with practiced ease. But they don't know what we know. And what's that? She smiled grimly. That I'm not the same pampered princess they tried to kill. The chamber opened before them, its crystalline walls soaring into darkness above. And there, suspended in a column of pure energy, floated Emperor Valerian himself. Father. Talia started forward, but Riker held her back. Wait, he whispered. Look. Shadows moved in the chamber's recesses. Lady Selene's emerged, flanked by Unity faction soldiers, both human and Astrian. She looked exactly as Talia remembered, except for the cold calculation in her eyes. Right on time, your radiance. The title dripped with mockery. I must say, you've exceeded expectations. Working with a human, learning to survive. I hardly recognized you on the security feeds. What have you done to my father? Nothing permanent. Yet. Selene's gestured to the energy column. He's helping us understand the ancestral core's true potential. Though I must admit, having you here will make everything much easier. The coordinates, Talia realized. You need both of us. Clever girl. The core's location is encoded in the royal bloodline, split between father and daughter. A failsafe your ancestors built in. Selene stepped closer. Join your father, Talia. Help us usher in a new age of true unity. By turning my people into weapons? Talia's skin began to glow with controlled anger. That's not unity, it's genocide. It's evolution. Selene's own skin shimmered with unnatural patterns. Look at me. I've already begun the transformation. Imagine it, Talia, the strength of both races combined. No more divisions, no more ancient prejudices. You're insane. But Talia's voice wavered as she saw the power radiating from her former mentor. The core was meant to preserve our people, not destroy what we are. Your radiance, Riker said quietly, whatever you're planning, now would be good. Talia met his eyes briefly, drawing strength from his presence. Then she faced Selene's again, drawing herself up to her full royal height. You forgot something important, my lady. She took a deliberate step forward. You taught me everything about being a proper Astrian princess. But Riker taught me how to break the rules. She moved with lightning speed, drawing and firing her plasma pistol not at Selene's, but at the crystal formation above her. The blast triggered a cascade reaction, sending crystalline shards raining down. In the chaos, Riker launched himself at the energy column's control panel. Genetic signature required. Selene shouted. You'll never. Actually, Riker called back, we already got that covered. He held up a familiar data crystal, the one from the Emperor's chambers. Your message gave us everything we needed. Including your security overrides. The energy column flickered and died. Emperor Valerian crumpled, but Talia was ready, catching him while Riker provided covering fire. Unity faction soldiers scrambled for position as their carefully laid trap dissolved into chaos. The core, Valerian gasped, his eyes focusing on his daughter. You must protect. I know, father. Talia helped him to his feet. But first, we're getting you out of here. Selene screamed in rage, her transformed body pulsing with stolen power. You don't understand what's at stake. The core could save both our species. Our species don't need saving, Talia shot back. They need understanding. Real understanding, not forced unity. The chamber shook as Selene unleashed her stolen powers, crystal formations shattering around them. But Talia stood her ground, supported by her father on one side and Riker on the other. One last lesson, my lady. Talia raised her plasma pistol. Never underestimate a princess who's learned to think for herself. The battle that followed would change everything, for Talia, for both their peoples, and for the future of human-Astrian relations. But in that moment, standing between the two worlds she now bridged, Talia finally understood what her father had meant about being stronger than she knew. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for something much bigger, a future where unity came from choice, not force. A future she and Riker had shown was possible. And she was ready for it. The crystal mines trembled with unleashed power as Selene's transformation reached its peak. Her form had become something neither fully human nor Astrian, a twisted embodiment of forced unity. Energy cascaded from her in waves, threatening to bring the entire chamber down around them. The containment field is failing, Riker shouted over the chaos, checking readings on his scanner. If she keeps channeling power like this, she'll trigger a chain reaction through all the crystal matrices. Talia supported her father as they took cover behind a fallen column. The whole mine network could collapse, she realized. Half the city is built over these tunnels. Now you understand, Selene's voice boomed, distorted by power. Only the strong should survive. Those who can embrace true evolution. Emperor Valerian stirred, his strength slowly returning. Talia, the core, it's responding to her corruption. You must. I know what I have to do. Talia met her father's eyes. But not because I'm a princess. Because it's right. She turned to Riker, allowing herself one moment to memorize his face. Keep him safe. Don't do anything stupid, your radiance. His hand caught hers. I'm just starting to get used to having you around. Me? Never. She squeezed his hand, then stepped out to face her former mentor. Lady Selene. You wanted the power of my bloodline? Come and get it. Talia felt the crystals singing in her veins as she walked forward, generations of royal heritage awakening to her call. But unlike Selene's, she didn't try to force the power. She let it flow naturally, remembering everything she'd learned about finding strength in vulnerability. Foolish girl. Selene's launched a blast of corrupted energy. You never had the courage to grasp real power. Talia didn't dodge. Instead, she opened herself to the crystal network around them, letting its pure resonance flow through her. The blast dispersed against her natural connection to the core. You're wrong, Talia said calmly. Real power isn't about force. It's about understanding. She took another step forward. Something I learned from a human mechanic who saw past my title to who I could become. The chamber's crystals began to pulse in sync with her heartbeat. Talia felt the echo of every ruler in her bloodline, but also something newer, the practical strength she'd gained in her time with Riker. The determination of someone who had chosen to become more than what she was born to be. The ancestral core wasn't meant to be a weapon, she continued, her voice carrying through the chamber. It's a bridge. A connection between what we were and what we can choose to be. Pretty words from a pampered princess, Selene snarled, but uncertainty crept into her twisted features. The crystal matrices around her were responding to Talia's resonance, their corrupted patterns beginning to stabilize. I was pampered, Talia acknowledged. I was helpless. But I changed. I chose to change. Her skin glowed with pure light now, the true power of her heritage. That's what you never understood. Real unity can't be forced. It has to be chosen, again and again, by people willing to see past their differences. She reached out, not with violence but with understanding, letting her connection to the core touch Selene's corrupted form. The chamber filled with blinding light as two kinds of power collided, one born of force, the other of choice. Riker! Talia called out. The containment field. He was already moving, understanding her plan without words. While Talia held Selene's in a resonance lock, Riker rerouted power through the chamber's ancient systems. Human technology and Astrian energy working in perfect harmony. Selene screamed as the corruption began to leach from her form, drawn into the containment field. The stolen power she'd used to transform herself was stripped away, leaving her human and Astrian components to settle back into their natural states. When the light faded, Talia stood at the heart of the chamber, the crystal matrices around her humming with renewed purpose. Selene's lay unconscious, her body returned to normal. The Unity faction soldiers, seeing their leader fallen and their plans in ruins, surrendered to the royal guards who had finally fought their way into the chamber. Well done, daughter. Emperor Valerian approached, standing straighter now. Though I suspect this isn't quite how your ancestors imagined their power being used. Times change, father. Talia smiled as Riker joined them. Maybe it's time our people changed too. Not by force, but by choice. Speaking of choices, Riker said carefully, what happens now? With us? Talia looked at her father, then back at the man who had helped her discover who she truly was. That depends. How do you feel about a job as the royal mechanic? I hear the princess is terribly high maintenance. High maintenance? Riker's laugh echoed through the chamber. Your radiance, you redefine the term. But he pulled her close, not caring about protocol or the watching guards. Talia melted into his embrace, feeling the last walls between their worlds crumbling. Emperor Valerian cleared his throat. We'll need to discuss some changes to the royal protocols, I suppose. Many changes, Talia agreed. Starting with removing those ridiculous restrictions on human-Astrian relationships. As you wish. Her father's eyes twinkled. Though I hope you'll at least learn to dress yourself before the wedding. Oh, I can dress myself now. Talia grinned up at Riker. I just prefer having help from my favorite mechanic. In the days that followed, the story of the pampered princess who learned to be a warrior spread through both human and Astrian communities. But those who knew Talia best understood that the real story wasn't about a princess learning to fight, it was about a woman learning to choose her own path. The crystal mines were sealed, their power safely contained. The Unity faction was disbanded, its misguided dream of forced evolution replaced by natural collaboration between the species. And if anyone thought it strange to see the Astrian princess working alongside her human partner in a mechanical shop, learning to build even as she learned to rule, well, they kept it to themselves. After all, true unity wasn't about erasing differences. It was about choosing to bridge them, one small step at a time. And sometimes, those steps started with a princess learning to put on her own clothes, and ending up saving the world in the process.